Good morning and welcome to the new episode of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. Canada is endowed with huge natural resources, and these natural resources make it really rich. The identification of those resources, the exploitation and the commercialization of those resources has fed millions of Canadians, made them prosper, and oil sector is one which made Canada come on the top. But as the world moves away from the fossil fuels, there's a danger, an immediate danger, that Canada would suffer from energy security. A, the growing resentment against the fossil fuels, right or wrong, but it's there. Little knowing that even if you abolish the fossil fuels, as I have said many times, the problem of global warming is not going to be solved. There have been 6 extinctions of the world till now, and the next one is due any time. The removal of the fossil fuels is only a band-aid, and we have seen that where the fossil fuels have been removed, things are not better. Look at Iceland. Look at Greenland. Iceland is the only country in the world which has 100% renewable energy, no pollution at all, and yet is warming because as far as the global geographical climatic conditions are concerned, there are no barriers. And coming to the Canadian energy security, which is very high now, we see that the gas prices plummeted in 2020, fell down in March before the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 pandemic. Russia and Saudi Arabia, two of the world's largest oil producers, set off a market share that sent prices lower and lower. And after COVID-19 had spread, demand fell sharply as businesses closed, governments restricted travel, and for several hours in April 2020, the prices of West Texas Intermediate fell below zero. It was, people are not aware, but I still remember it was April 19. And I was talking to some people from Bombay. I was in Mumbai at that time. To my friends in States and in Copenhagen, and they told me that the real price of the West Texas Intermediate oil was minus $37 per barrel. They were paying you lift oil and we'll pay you $37 per barrel. So as the oil prices drop, coupled with a global economic slowdown, it had adverse effects on other industries, global financial stability and oil producing economies. You might say that now again the prices are rising and they are going through the roof. But then don't forget, we are in imminent danger of the electric cars, hydrogen fuel cells fueled buses, and aircraft. Aircraft are there which run on the solar energy. So it's quite possible that this increase is going to be temporary in nature. In other words, no industrial economy is immune to these shocks. The situation then in 2020 prompted OPEC, that is OPEC members, and then 10 other oil producing countries to hold an emergency meeting to stabilize prices. And how they did it? Restricted supply, reduced crude oil production, But the shift away from the fossil fuels occurred quickly and unexpectedly. And all this noise about the reduction of carbon emissions, these even show that transition to the green energy still needs work. But when the politicians have an obsession, many times the suffering comes to the people in the shape of recession and poor economic conditions. And this away shift from the fossil fuel is a danger. Now, although Canada must move away from using fossil fuels, I don't deny it, it has to. To produce energy, a transition that comes too fast would harm Canadian economy. What we are doing is that our movement away from the fossil fuels is at a breakneck speed. It has to be systematic. We are not doing that. And the policy makers sitting in Ottawa lack the ability to strike a balance between the energy security and economic growth. Reason? The concept of energy security is not known to them. Now, what is energy security? It's reliable, affordable access to energy. Now, suppose all the cars on the road tomorrow are ordered to be electric cars. Do we have the sufficient charging stations? Because most of the cars run up to 200, 300 kilometers. So, when I look at the international finance and energy economics, I feel horrified in watching Canadian vulnerability to global energy market and the measures that promote Canadian energy security to ease the transition from fossil fuels to renewable. I must compliment Alberta and the Premier and his cabinet. Great. They are making Alberta, the world headquarters for exporting hydrogen. There's so much hydrogen is going to be produced. They're setting up the world's largest production centers of hydrogen. And the world's largest solar system is also being established in Alberta. So Albertans are trying to keep up their advantage of energy suppliers. First it was oil, now as oil going back. So what we are saying is since 2008, global oil and gas industry has suffered three shocks. The industry recovered from the shocks of 2008 and 2014. Would it also recover from the 2020 shock? And that shock last year amplified investors' concern about increasing environmental and political issues, decreasing and in fact increasing unstable returns associated with oil and gas. So when you are getting the return, as now the prices are rising, but they are unstable, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So the new investments in the sector are going to be put on hold. When the new investments are put on hold, the old investments would have a decreasing return. And once that psychological block is there, then it will result in the global energy market transition accelerating. Now, one of the biggest dangers which I perceive is stranded asset risk. And that is very closely related to energy transition. You might ask me what it is. Stranded assets are the infrastructure and resources, such as drilling rigs, pipelines, and oil in the ground. And all this today is tied to the fossil fuels, oil production, oil refinery, oil supply. As far as the hydrogen is concerned, now they are going to produce it. Solar, we have seen, it has been successful, but it can't be the only one. So, this stranded asset risk is increasing. From April 2020, to today, major oil producers have written off $69 billion worth of their assets. 69 billion. Not something to be sneezed at. And the result, 30% decrease in upstream exploration and production investments. So 1/3 of investment has decreased. This crisis also revealed an accelerated transition had the potential to harm Canadian economy. Now there was one report prepared which anticipated the combination of COVID-19 crisis and oil prices, how they would be very harmful to Canada. And imagine, this report was prepared by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, and 90% of the Canadians are not aware. The actual data shows, and that's not my statement, that by the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer, a record level GDP growth of minus 13% in June 2020. Minus 13%. And we say our GDP is 3% increasing and 1.5% increasing. When it's minus 13% decrease in June, a 13.7% increase in unemployment in May, and increase in federal debt to GDP ratio. Now here you are in for a shock. 53.98% increase in the federal debt to GDP ratio. And it's expected by that this year, this GDP ratio as compared to the federal debt would be 72.17%. Now when the national debt compared to GDP is such a ratio, you can well imagine where we are headed. So unlike the earlier two shocks which I referred to, that of 2008 and 2014, this is something which has horrendous risks. But I have yet to hear a single word from the Federal Finance Minister, from the Infrastructure Minister, and from the Prime Minister. A single word about the danger posed by this. 72.17% increase in federal debt to GDP ratio is something which should terrify them. So we have seen that this time it's steeper, faster, and still we are not opening our eyes. We are like Rip Van Winkle, gone to sleep for 20 years, and when we wake up the whole world would have changed. And then the Bank of Canada warns more frequent or severe extreme weather events and or a late and abrupt transition to low carbon economy could be detrimental to Canadian economy. Yes. Now, what is required? The policy makers must evaluate environmental, economic and social objectives. Purpose? To strike a balance between energy security and economic growth. As I said earlier, Canada is rich in resources. Its energy security is threatened in terms of supply and demand. Then we have the domestic regulations which are extremely harmful to the country, like restrictions on the direct foreign investment and trade facilitation, administration burden on personally owned enterprises, and the time and the bureaucratic hassles required to obtain permits. So all those discourage investments in the energy sector, including oil, gas, wind and nuclear. Then Canada is also vulnerable, which has huge risk, to the dynamics of global oil and gas market. And the decisions are not made by the Canadian oil producers, they are taken by the Saudi Arabia, Russia, United States and Qatar. and to bring isolated. We are isolated by the policies like the US decision to curtail pipeline construction. They talk of three amigos meeting, and quietly USA says no pipeline, thereby destroying the economy. The problem is that the Canadians do not have a strategic petroleum reserve or energy reserve. But don't be shocked. The emergency supply of oil and gas to decrease adverse effects of unexpected energy supply disruptions is practically zero, still nil. And that is the worst thing that can happen. You always need something to fall back on. And it's not there. Sorry for interruptions. The Canadians, amazing, despite being such huge producers of oil and gas, rely on imports because they cannot transport enough oil and gas from the west to the east. If you want, we don't have the tankers, and the tankers take a long time. We don't have the pipelines. Even Quebec didn't want Canada to build a pipeline. So what they do is, now if they have to export, they send the tankers to British Columbia and then transship them to the other places. Now going to Ontario via the Pacific, imagine. So these domestic regulations are harmful, and the pipeline politics hinders access to the international market. Now, what happens is that the political leaders discuss these issues in short term rather than finding solutions. And that delays the ultimate goal of facilitating a smooth long-term relations. I was looking at a recent RBC report, and they found cutting oil production could undermine Canadian ability to invest and develop green energy technologies, including electricity storage, nuclear energy, and green hydrogen. But if we are to benefit economically, then the carbon intensity of oil production has to be dropped. Now, we are ignoring that gas is a very reliable and affordable energy source, and it can play a huge role, a crucial role in the transition. And we are not using gas. Can you believe it? All your transport can be run on natural gas. India is running its local transport in Delhi and other places with CNG. Why can't Canada do it? So exporters promote gas as a cheap energy source, whereas the opponent claim it impedes the energy transition. They forget that if the transition is with a stoppage, with a block, it shall be dangerous. To accelerate economic recovery, government may offer incentives and should offer incentives in the gas industry, because that will boost the industry's reliance in the long term. But then what has happened? Federal government has practically taken a vow to abandon investment in fossil fuels. On the other hand, it's promoting energy diversification in natural gas and blue and grey hydrogen projects. And that's going to make harder to eliminate gas from the energy mix. I agree. Using natural gas is not the ultimate solution to the energy transition. But for the next 5 to 10 years, this is going to be the major energy source. So the way forward, the transition from the fossil fuel is going to be there. That's definite. That's a given thing. With the global pressure and the abandonment of the major suppliers, so Canadian's economy is not ready to shift abruptly away from the oil and gas. Despite all the efforts of Premier of Alberta, oil and gas would not give way to hydrogen and to solar energy immediately. It's going to take time. It would happen, but it will take time. So what is important is that the major oil and gas producers, if they are destroyed, there will be economic vulnerability. So what's required is to build a model, the model that examines Canadian energy security and transition in a global context. The model needs to study the role of gas in bridging short-term and long-term energy security. Let me be very clear. If you take energy to be an alternate, gas, no. It is purely transition. What we need is to stop politicalization of the energy transitions. This politicalization being indulged by provincial governments and the federal governments are going to hurt directly the industry, and the industry would affect Canadian lives. It will defeat the purpose of implementing an economically viable energy process, and that we don't want. But that's going to happen until and unless the leaders wake up to the reality and take proactive action. Are they ready for that? You know it better. Thank you.